we've understood the importance of doing a bit of quantification, a bit of reductionism, a bit of turning things into a number. It's useful to do that, but at the same time, we recognize the importance of having enough of that kind of color and complexity, and we put the two together, and we're the first people in the world to do that.
Okay, so welcome everyone to episode 3 of the Heartland Strong podcast. It's great to have you listening to this. Today we're being joined by Bill Kaye-Blake and Payne. They are both co-editors of Heartland Strong, and Penny is a social scientist with AgResearch based up in Ruakura in Hamilton, and Bill is the lead for economics at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Wellington. So if you listen to episode 2, Bill talked about the resilience framework as part of that episode. And so if you'd like more details about that, head back to that episode and have a listen. But in the meantime, Penny, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into resilience work?
Yeah, sure. So my background's in community psychology, so I've done a master's in that, and that's really looking at why groups respond the way they do and how we can empower them to make positive change. Why I'm interested in rural resilience, I grew up in semi-rural New Zealand at the top of the Kaimais, so it's always been interesting to me. And I guess there's so many changes that are affecting New Zealand. We're always going to have rural communities. It's just a question of what are they going to look like.
And Bill, can you just give us a small snapshot of your background again, please?
Sure. So I'm an agricultural economist by training. I've been working on food and agriculture for 20 to 25 years. Touched on a lot of different topics along the way, water policy, agricultural innovation, and as part of that, how farms and communities can be resilient over time. So I got involved in this work that AgResearch led.
Cool. Yeah. It's fascinating. And I love the fact that you're coming from different perspectives, but working on the same project and working on the same team. It's really good. So we're going to get right into it and ask you both, what is resilience? So I don't know, Bill, Penny, who wants to go first?
I'll start us off. So resilience, we have a definition of resilience that's centered around the ability to cope with change. And that comes out of a whole set of research over a few years that our team did. So it's not one that we've invented, but we've pulled it out of the literature where we've reviewed a lot of work. And as part of that, we've picked up 2 specific types of resilience. One is, you can sort of refer to it as bouncing back, and the other is bouncing forward. So bouncing back is this idea that you're returning to what you had before. It's kind of getting back, you have a shock, you have a difficulty, and you get yourself back on your feet. And part of that, there's a sense of identity. This is who I am, and I'm getting back to it. Bouncing forward is about adaptation. It's about adapting to change. The only constant is change, as they say. And so you get ready for it, and you modify what you're doing, you adapt so that you do well and you cope with that change. Penny, what have I missed?
No, I think that's everything. Yeah.
Excellent. So it seems that with those bouncing back and then bouncing forward, measuring those things might be a little bit different. I don't know. Can you tell us about how you would measure resilience and in that context?
Okay, I'm not sure about the difference between measuring those 2 types of resilience. We've tried both a qualitative and quantitative response, so putting the words and the numbers together to paint a more holistic picture. So we've gone out and said to communities, how do you feel about your resilience, and got that descriptive side of things. And then we've also got them to rate their resilience. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how resilient are you? And then we've looked at the statistics as well, so another different numeric perspective of that. And together we look at those 3 things and see how do they relate, what presents the most complete picture of resilience, and we've found that you put them all together and that is the most complete picture.
Well, the question of bouncing forward and bouncing back and the difference between them is a difficult one, because again, sort of bouncing back is about your identity. And when we go and we talk with communities, they have a good sense of who they are. and they certainly don't want to lose the good aspects of that identity. Then the bouncing forward is that adaptation, and you hear a lot of change and sort of building yourself up into change when we talk with communities. So when we're talking with farmers specifically, or we're talking in community workshops, they know that things are changing around them. International markets, regulation, et cetera, and they're getting themselves set up to deal with it. So definitely through the, as Penny talked about, the qualitative discussion, we've heard elements of both.
Yeah. Okay. And so when, Penny, I love your description of using both qualitative and quantitative research and questions to try and understand what's actually going on. So what's really surprised you or stood out when you've asked that and in that description of resilience?
Well, consistently across the board, they're pretty positive about the social aspects. So they like the small town feel that they can walk down the street and they know who people are, people know who they are. There's no traffic lights or parking meters sometimes. They specifically brought up those things. And then on the other side of that, the more complex social issues as well. So mental health, drug addiction, that sort of thing. So these really embedded social issues. So it's it's been interesting seeing how complex the picture is and how there's two sides of that coin, the positive and the negative of the social aspects.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Bill? Anything that's really stood out for you?
Again, I think the social aspects have really stood out, and partly it's because I'm an economist, and so I tend to look at sort of numbers and markets all the time, and I forget that there are people there. But when you talk with people in rural communities, it is very much about the people they're surrounded with and the relationships they have, and that's very much a focus. It's also a strength of these communities. Probably another thing that stood out is the range of opinions. So what happens when we run these workshops that we've been doing is we ask people to put a rating, as Penny said, from 1 to 10 on say your social resilience or your environmental resilience. And when we look at them, we can we can draw a picture of them. We can do a distribution, do a graphic of it. And we do find that people sort of most of the responses kind of fall into a very narrow range, let's say a 6 or a 7. But there'll also be people that are far away from that. And if we look across all of the work, they've ranged from a 3, sort of not very resilient at all, up to a 10. Everything is going just fine. And to get that real diversity of opinion has been interesting. When we talk with people, they tell us about their own particular individual sort of circumstances and how they relate to their community. And so there'll be a reason that they've rated something a 3. The river's really bad and I used to be able to swim in it and now I'm worried about it, that kind of thing. But when we look at things like age and gender, there's no kind of pattern to it. So from kind of a sociological perspective, we can't say, well, women are more positive than men. We can't say that. Penny, what do you think?
Yeah, we have found some very specific patterns in terms of Māori rated their environmental resilience as lower and older people rated their social resilience as higher, but none of those bigger picture demographic gender patterns that Bill's talking about. Yeah. The other thing is we have a discussion afterwards when we plot those different ratings up on the wall, and if we see that there's a really wide variance, we might say, does someone want to describe why they rated this way? And we found that sometimes they have a different definition of that type of resilience, even though we've had a discussion about what we include behind that definition. So particularly for cultural resilience, there's different ways that people look at that, and that might be behind their rating.
It's really fascinating around the people can put a number on resilience. You've asked them that question, how do you rate your resilience? And so it's not too complex to put a number on, is what I'm hearing, Penny?
Bill?
So, Yeah, no. So it's a good question. Can you put a number on it? And I mean, we do. We ask people to put a number on it at the end of a 2 or 3 hour workshop. So we build up to it, and we start by having the conversation, and we really get people to think about their community and how they relate to it, and all of the sort of good things that are going on in issues, and then put a number on it. And everybody sort of understands the context at that point, that we've had this long discussion, and now we're trying to summarize things. So it's done with kind of full recognition of the complexity involved. So you can do it, but also you have to recognize the limitations of it.
Yeah, which is fair enough. And I guess that discussion is part of opening up all of those different reasons and the complexities, which is part of the deal of resilience. So how is the approach that you have used for measuring resilience different to other common approaches? Are there common approaches to measuring resilience?
Okay. Yeah, so there's a couple of common ways in the literature that people have looked at it. Usually it's quantitative or qualitative. So they will take the statistics, for example, and put together different measures and build sort of an indicator system, which we found is an perhaps overly simplified way of looking at it, because we found that those numbers don't match with the community members' ratings. So which one is correct? And then we've also found that people can do in-depth case studies of qualitative material. So they might go out and do detailed interviewing with a whole lot of people in the community. But while that gives a really good picture, it's hard to then pick up that model and apply that in lots of places and get a different sort of accurate, easy measure of resilience that's consistent across places and time. So we've put the two of those together to try and work with both of those, remove both of those deficits.
Yeah. Bill, anything to add there?
The main thing I want to do is just underline what Penny said, is that what we've done that's unique, that's novel, is put the two together. So we've understood the importance of doing a bit of quantification, a bit of reductionism, a bit of turning things into a number. It's useful to do that, but at the same time, we recognize the importance of having enough of that kind of color and complexity, and we've put the two together, and we're the first people in the world to do that.
Well done. It's good.
And in fact, we've taken the approach externally. So Penny was just over in the States earlier in the year running workshops in Vermont. So they've taken our method and they've applied it there.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting. We went out to 4 rural communities, similar to exactly what we did over here, essentially. And we found really similar things. And the method works exactly the same over there for the data collection. Slightly different issues and positive things raised, but overall really similar.
Wow. And so were the communities similar as well? Like, so a mix of similar type rural communities?
Yeah, so we picked them so that they matched quite well. We picked 2 who we thought were slightly more resilient and 2 who we thought were slightly less resilient, agricultural kind of based communities, and size between 4,500 and 10,000. So similar size.
So if anyone is listening to this, Penny and Bill, they should get in touch if they'd be keen to try this out.
Yep. Absolutely. We've actually had... since we did the initial case study work on 4 towns, and that was the real in-depth stuff that we did with sort of full academic rigor, and we've published that in a couple of journal articles. Since we did that, we've had a few people approach us, and we've run some other workshops in other communities. What we can do then is write a report that feeds back to them what we heard, so that they have a snapshot in time about their own community resilience and how community members think about themselves.
Excellent. I love that research is getting used and is useful for the communities themselves to be able to do what they want to do. That's the ultimate, I feel. Anything else that you want to tell us about measuring resilience, Bill?
Wow, anything else? So I've been taking this work a little bit farther recently, and really working very hard on the quantitative part of it, because that's where my specialty is. And we did the original work was case studies focused on 4 towns. And I've tried to apply just the quantitative side of things to all the rural communities in New Zealand. And I found some interesting things. So first of all, the work that we do the quantitative work that we do lines up pretty well with the New Zealand Deprivation Index. So that's a way of sort of confirming that in the quantitative side, we're finding similar results, and that gives us some confidence in the quantitative results. But what we know, of course, that Penny discussed before was that you put the quantitative stuff against the qualitative in the workshops, and you get a richer picture, and that's how you get kind of the full picture, is doing all of it. So it confirms that the quantitative stuff is on the right track, and that's exciting. But then we've delved into it even further, and what we've discovered is that some of the individual indicators that we've used correlate really strongly with the overall picture. So we might build a resilience index. So we did build a resilience index that has 15 bits of data associated with it. But actually, there are about 3 or 4 of them that correlate really strongly with the whole index. So what that says is that you only need one of them to get kind of a good picture of a community from a quantitative perspective. And the one that really struck me was smoking rates correlate really highly with the resilience index that we built, and therefore also with the New Zealand Deprivation Index. So it's interesting when you delve into the quantitative work, kind of, I guess, how the numbers pan out. I do need to emphasize, of course, that that's just one slice of it, that you need the whole picture, but working with the numbers has been interesting.
Absolutely. And just being able to get a quick gauge of something is quite useful. So you heard it here first, folks. Smoking rate.
But that's exactly it. It's the quick gauge, because if you're looking at doing a little bit of policy work or a little bit of, industry outreach or something, getting a quick snapshot of a place and a bit of understanding is really helpful. So if something like smoking rates links you into all of this other resilience research pretty easily, then suddenly it's not just an unknown community that you're going into. Actually, you start to have a bit of understanding.
Absolutely, which can make the difference with what you're doing between success or otherwise. Yeah. Cool. Penny, anything else you wanted to add about measuring resilience?
Oh gosh, I think the only thing is that we're not done. We haven't resolved everything, and we still haven't found what the best measure is, or I guess one thing we can look at in isolation. So more work to do in this space.
Excellent. Always more work, but it sounds like what you've uncovered so far is not only really interesting, but also quite useful in just giving people a gauge of what's going on. Research into action. Brilliant. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Penny. It's great to have you on this Heartland Strong podcast, episode 3, around measuring resilience. For those of you who might be listening who haven't read Heartland Strong, the book, we encourage you to get hold of a copy and have a read. We've got a link to it in the notes, so please click through and grab a copy. And we've got more in this series coming up, so please tune in or go back if you haven't listened to the ones so far and have a listen to Heartland Strong podcast. Thanks.